school are you with?
Digital Harbor High School.
Digital Harbor High School. Okay, all right. So, your classifications: seniors, juniors,
Seniors.
Oh, you said that with so much excitement. Okay, so have you guys decided what are you going to do for, your college as far as majors or choosing? Okay, so which?
I'm going to University of Maryland Eastern Shore for special ed psychology.
Nice.
Hopefully, I'm thinking about University of Maryland Eastern Shore as well for economics. But my number one major is philosophy.
Okay, all right.
McDaniel College for communications.
Okay.
Thinking about Stevenson for either communications or education.
All right, and
University of Maryland Eastern Shore marine biology.
okay.
Ohio State IT Essentials.
Oh, all right.
You all have talked a lot about leaders. And when we think about the founding of the nation, we usually fall back on what most Americans learn in school, which is the founding fathers. So you think of George Washington, Thomas Jefferson. So we use Thomas Jefferson because he's the writer of the Declaration of Independence. But we wanted to put him in context because he's not the only voice of freedom. And we know that he also had a limited vision of freedom. Thomas Jefferson held 609 people in slavery during his lifetime, including his own children. The bricks you see behind him there are the names of the 609 people that he held in bondage. So while he's speaking of freedom, he has a narrower, limited view of freedom. So we wanted to bring forward other great leaders who were also thinking of freedom and pushing forward our notion of freedom in this time period. So what we have Benjamin Banneker, who is a scientist and an engineer, and he envisioned, because of his observations of nature, of a fuller definition of freedom. Bring attention to is Anthony Johnson. Anthony Johnson was a person who was originally probably from Angola, because he ended up freeing himself and actually buying land in Virginia. And what do you think he named his land? Angola. And so we tried to tell individual stories throughout this gallery to show people how there were different experiences throughout this time period. And we have very few records left, but we want everyone to know that even if you have very few records and certainly not a picture of that individual, that we can still piece their stories together and tell a compelling story and make that person come alive. So with Anthony Johnson, we look through court records, we look through land records. Oh, commodity crops. Commodity crops are anything that you, like sugar. It's something that you grow just to sell. Like if you ate all the sugar that you grew, you would die and explode. Same with tobacco or cotton. So it's things that you're really growing just for the market, which people had never done before. Usually they just grew wheat, and if I had a little extra, I'd sell it. But now they're just doing it for the money. So speaking of money, what we've got right here is the transatlantic slave trade. We've got power and profit.
$4,000 in gold. Senator Greer, a marshal, bought for his boy to play with.
Mama, pigs need to long, not to separate us folks.
Community to community. So they're riding the rails from Chicago to New York, or from New York down to New Orleans, or New Orleans to LA. And so what happened is that the Pullman porters, first of all, they formed a union, always a good thing to do. But they also began to really be the nexus that carried news from place to place. This is before television. Newspapers could be slow. Not everyone could always afford the newspaper or trust what's being printed in the newspaper. And the Pullman porters became leaders within different African American communities. So when you look back and kind of try to find the genealogy of different leaders, you'll often find it goes back to the Pullman porters.
I think that nonviolence is fine, but I don't think it can ever go far enough.
Legally at the time.
Does it dry up like a raisin in the sun, or fester like a sore and then run? Does it stink like rotten meat, or crust and sugar over like a syrupy sweet? Maybe it just sags like a heavy load, or does it explode? What happens to a dream deferred? Does it dry up like a raisin in the sun?
This program also gives students an opportunity to earn credits at the school that will be applicable upon graduation.
Sure. It's a wonderful question. Two answers to it. One, we would hope so. The challenge with any curricula that's across the country is it's a very localized, hyper-localized decision as to whether it's deemed a for credit or course. We always push for it and ask for it, but we just don't know yet whether it'll satisfy certain hours or graduation requirements. We're hopeful that it does. Usually the way the program is implemented is it's implemented into like a first cousin of this course, social sciences, social studies, history. And because we find there's a structure there, there's a teacher there, which is really important, that this can be kind of worked into and embedded in, and you don't have to go recreate the wheel and fight for, one of the things we fight for all the time is just air time in schools, seat time in schools, and that's a really, there's not a lot of bandwidth these days, and you got to kind of fight that out. So the best thing you can do is put it into a course that's required and have that play out. But hopefully in DC we would get the support to have it be a required course and have some benefits for teachers who do that.
Why was this partnership effort important to you?
Well, for many reasons, it was important because a personal legacy. When I went to school at the University of Tennessee and I was playing for my father, I didn't really know what I was going to do. I majored in African American Studies because it was a great interest of mine. I knew that I wanted to have an impact and pass on the message that I'd been given. So when you have a significant partnership with an amazing organization like EVERFI, it expands it to a place that you couldn't have done this on your own. And just the fact that so many students, peers of mine who I grew up with, so many of us are kind of still looking for an identity, right? And so when you can come to a museum like this and you can see your contribution, your relevance to not only to your own culture, but the culture of the world. And I think that that's really what is significant. Even peers that I played with and played against, we have these conversations about our impact on sports, right? But historically, what's so amazing is now we can go back in history and see the impact of people that weren't just entertainers, right? They were educators, they were lawmakers. And so this is what's significant to me is we can get to see who we really are in our impact, and then we can really it can expand our vision of what our legacy can be.
Where do you see young African Americans in the tech industry in the next 5 years with possible efforts of going through your program as well?
So it's something we think about every day at EVERFI. None of us in leadership at any tech company have done it would be even generous to say a very good job. And so I think a lot about where that starts. And, it starts when you look at it's why we care so much about operating in schools at as young an age as we can. Because what you find out, much like we talked about access to something like an African American history course, when you think about AP computer science classes, you think about the early STEM and coding engineering classes. And again, you go to schools that have means, they have those. You go to schools that don't, they don't. And so one of the things that we need to do as an industry, and we're really pushing hard to get the industry to fund it as a company, is do two things. One is the industry has to step up. And I mean, government, listen, I'm a good old-fashioned former state legislator, and I think a lot about what government can do. Government's made an active decision not to fund this stuff, particularly in high-need, high-poverty areas. So you either say the Easter Bunny's going to bring it, or Santa's going to bring it, or something where you say the industry, right? So the companies like mine who need to hire constantly really talented people from diverse backgrounds into engineering jobs and whatever. And EVERFI, I mean, not to toot our own horns, is one of the very best, but we still stink at it. And so I'm hopeful that the industry doesn't look outside of its walls and point and say, well, there's not enough jobs. There's not enough, there aren't enough people to hire out of whatever. Go and look at what Howard's doing in their, in both their STEM and their CS departments. I mean, extraordinary talent coming out of there. So there's no excuse anymore. But having said that, we have to do a better job of feeding these and seeding these programs into schools across the country. Coding and engineering, back-end development, data literacy. And the fun thing about this is a lot of these jobs are jobs that have never existed before. So there's no excuse kind of for, like you say, man, it's not like I grew up as looking to be a data scientist. I can't even tell you what it means right now. So we need to prepare kids to have those jobs, analytics, data science, that stuff, and make sure that that's in the curriculum of schools. And I think the industry needs to step up and pay for that because it's going to benefit them down the road.